Good evening. I'm your host, Jason Miles, here for another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. If you're new to the channel, welcome. So glad to have you here. If you do like what we're doing, please hit like and subscribe. It is a passive gesture that goes a very long way in promoting the channel. If you are a returning listener, subscriber, or one of our very valued patrons, so glad to have you back. And after this show, for patrons and paid YouTube subscribers, we'll be going beyond the velvet rope of the virtual VIP to hang out in the champagne room, where we'll be joined by some special guests and our main guest tonight, who, maybe unbeknownst to many of you guys, is a bit of a metalhead. We have talked music before. I forget if we've actually done it on air or off air, but 40 years has passed since some of the greatest hard rock and metal albums were released. And in that magical room, we are going to have an all-star discussion. I'm not going to tell you who's all going to be there, but some of your favorite left voices who are also metalheads, and maybe well-known metal musician. Maybe I'm not sure. But if you'd like to become part of the TIR Patreon crew and join us for movie nights and champagne rooms, well, there's a couple of ways to become a patron or paid YouTube subscriber. Your donation makes sure that TIR can continue to stay on air and bring programming such as this. $3 a month or a one-time payment of $30 for the year is all that it takes. Trust me, it's worth it. Now, let's get to why you guys are here. The media. Is this truly the post-truth era, or are we living in something more insidious? An age of alternative facts, self-truth, and algorithmically reinforced belief systems. There was a time when mainstream media dominated public discourse, when the fight was against a relatively unified press apparatus. That fight still exists, but the terrain has changed. Today, news and information are radically fragmented. We don't even need local news anymore for traffic, weather, or sports. Our phones deliver those instantly. What's been lost in that transition isn't just shared experience, but shared authority, trusted sources capable of grounding public reality. The collapse of trust hasn't produced mass enlightenment. It's produced mass panic, exhaustion, and a kind of apathetic malaise. In that vacuum, media corporations have found no problem aligning themselves with the Trump regime. At a moment of unprecedented media consolidation, monopolistic in scope, this administration has shown zero interest in restraining corporate power. In fact, it benefits from it. Take CBS, for example. The recent promotion of opinion editor Barry Weiss to a position of influence within. Already, Weiss has proven to be a midwit disaster. At the last minute, she pulled a 60-minute segment on CENSORED, the horrific mega prison where the Trump administration has been disappearing people swept up in terroristic ICE raids. That segment still aired on CBS Canada, where it racked up millions of views online. A serious, well-produced piece of journalism seen largely by audiences who didn't even follow the show itself. It went viral not because CBS stood behind it, but because it broke through the noise in a sensationalized way, accidental way, which tells us everything about how information circulates now. Weiss continues to brand herself as fair and balanced, neither left nor right, while functionally serving as one of the most effective cheerleaders for the contemporary right. She helped pull figures like Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson, and Sam Harris out of the darker corners of the internet and into the mainstream, laundering reactionary politics through the language of inquiry and civility. All of this brings us to tonight's conversation. We're joined by Mickey Huff of Project Censored to discuss State of the Free Press 2026, the 50th anniversary edition of their annual yearbook on the most underreported stories of the past year and the structural failures of the press that keeps those stories buried. This isn't just about what didn't make the news. It's about how power decides what counts as reality and what happens to a society when that decision is no longer contested. Please welcome, coming all the way live from Ithaca, New York, Mickey Huff.
Hey, Jason. It's an honor to be back with you, man. Thanks so much for having me, and what an incredible introductory monologue you had there. Really hitting a lot of major points. So I'm sure we'll have a lot of things to discuss today.
I told you there was a direction I wanted to go with this show. You guys have been going for 50 years. Talking about the news that didn't make the news. What has changed more, the mechanisms of censorship or the public's relationship to information itself? And do you feel, there's a two-part question, sorry, that post-truth is a useful concept, or does it let certain institutions off the hook by suggesting that truth simply evaporated rather than being actively undermined?
So, with that dissertation, we'll take up the rest of the year. But very an incredibly important question, Jason. I'll do my best. If you can help me maybe stay on point, I'd appreciate it. Given that I'm prone to tangent, particularly given the breadth you've just given me. 50 years. Let's go back. Quickly, Project Censored was founded in 1976, coming out of the ashes of Watergate, out of the malaise and destruction of Vietnam, a collapse in public trust in public institutions, and interestingly, and I would argue ironically later, the media, which was under attack from the Richard Nixon administration, actually ended up coming out looking a little more refurbished and renewed, and earned a little bit more trust from the general public as we went through this period. And I would argue for interesting reasons, and maybe we can get to some of that. But as I start in the forward of the new censored book, I actually started by sort of running down a sort of a descriptive list of things, where I was talking about how we find ourselves on a precipice. We have rising economic insecurity and domestic division, foreign wars, immigration and civil rights issues over free expression, a crisis in confidence regarding the role of government, again, cratering public trust in elected officials and institutions. Our leaders were averting their gaze from a genocide. Fossil fuel pollution was proliferating. We had climate crisis, on and on, right? The intelligence agencies and police apparatus had been weaponized and militarized, and we faced numerous existential threats, right? And then I went on to say, well, it would be reasonable to conclude that the preceding passage describes our present circumstances. Fair enough. Mm-hmm. But I was talking about America of the 70s. Rather than Gaza, East Timor. And this is before, in terms of that topic. And as far as the fossil fuel companies, they were busy studying the impacts of their industry on the rest of the world. And they were keeping secret, ExxonMobil was, that their product was destroying the planet, right? So in many ways, because I know you had posed this as a better, worse, now, where are we? What's the trajectory? The types of censorship. Right now, we're living in what's I refer to as an epistemic crisis. Okay. And we see an assault on the entire knowledge industry. And we can kind of back into that later. But if you go back to the starting of the project, the reason that what I just described, the reason that that's significant is that it led the communication scholar, Carl Jensen, who had a background in journalism and then advertising, to actually start Project Censored at Sonoma State University in Northern California in 1976, based on a question that he thought there was a question that had an answer and also a problem that had a solution. And he saw public education and students as the vehicle right, for the solution to try to make to make more responsible our public sphere, our elected officials, and also to make stronger the free press, have it be more independent and more adherent to the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics, which I think is incredibly important, because that's the climate in which Project Censored came to be. And Carl's main question was, how is it that Richard Nixon won the 1972 election in such a landslide, given the crimes of Watergate that took place before the election? Good question. It wasn't until a year or two later that we saw people from Washington Post like Woodward and Bernstein, right? Bernstein, who went on to write more about CIA media, Woodward, who went on to be more of a CIA mouthpiece in a lot of ways with access to elite sources. They kind of went like that. But those guys were late to the story. The indie press and others were talking about the crimes of the Nixon administration everywhere from Kent State to Vietnam, not to mention CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President, that was breaking into the Democratic headquarters of the Watergate Hotel, which the media at the time was kind of thinking it's like some kind of third-rate burglary that at the time ended up being one of the biggest political crimes in the United States in the 20th century. And Jensen asked, well, where was the media? Mm-hmm. Like, why did it take as long as it did to catch up to that story? And again, he was a critic of the media. But let's not think about critics as people that just bash the press. And he was no H.L. Mencken that like used sardonic humor to bash the idiocy of the American public, right? There's a time and place for that. The time is probably always, the place maybe now, but we can get into that again later too. But Jensen wanted to create a project based on critical thinking and inquiry. In fact, what he was doing was really critical media literacy pedagogy before we even had the language to describe it. And what he did is he took this question about, well, what would happen if we had a more responsive media that covered issues that mattered in the public interest and they were reported on vigorously without any interference from the government, without any commercial interest coming in and saying, well, that's not going to sell or that'll offend our advertisers. What if we really just had a free press that reported in the public interest? And Jensen believed, what if we knew some of the things we knew about Nixon later before 72? Would that have changed the course of the election? Well, as an historian, coulda, woulda, shoulda, who knows? That's barroom talk. That's not journal material. But it's a legit question, because given how much came out after Watergate, and we had the Church Committee hearings in the Senate, the Pike Committee hearings in the House, we started to only scratch the surface of the corruption of the FBI, the CIA, including media collusion with government. And I want to hit on that riff for a minute. The Nixon White House, not only did Spiro Agnew, before he was busted for tax fraud and whatever else and kicked out, William Safire put the beautiful words in his mouth, the alliteration, that the press were nattering nabobs of negativism. And Nixon went after the press as the enemy of the people. Trump wasn't the first to do it. And by the way, go back further, this is what the Nazis did. This is what actually happened after World War I, what they called the Lügenpresse. And that's where we had the rise of right-wing movements in the Weimar Republic. And then, of course, we know what happened, later on with Goebbels emulating Edward Bernays and using propaganda to justify the genocidal Nazi regime. We'll just footnote that and try not to reference it too much. So, but what comes out of that, I think, is very important and significant, because Jensen wanted the press to be better at their job. He didn't want to bash them and tear them down. And he thought an academic research project where students would research the independent media before the internet, before cable, none of that. They literally subscribed to these independent journals and magazines, and he had students combing through hundreds of copies of physical papers that were looking for independent news stories in the public interest that the corporate media weren't covering. And there was no cable. There's no internet, there's no podcasting. It's the major networks, PBS, and the major newspapers. And so students did this research, and they came up with what he called the top censored stories of the year, right? They were reported, but they didn't get to the public, right? If the, if the tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, doesn't make a sound, right?
Mm-hmm.
If nobody's looking at the independent press and it's not being platformed and amplified, not enough people get to hear about it, including people on platforms like the Washington Post or the New York Times or CBS, like Walter Cronkite at the time, that could blast these messages out to the public. And it did make a difference. Cronkite did make a difference in Vietnam when he said, "What's happening after the Tet Offensive? I thought we were winning this war." Right. And, warts and all. By the way, the Nixon White House suppressed a story. They contacted the president of CBS News and asked them not to run a clip that Cronkite did on Watergate before the Washington Post covered it. That's a direct violation of the First Amendment. So Project Censored was born out of that climate. And Jason, here we are.
Well, can I ask you something about what you're saying? I watched an interview. I can't remember if I watched an interview or if it was an interview I did with Norm Finkelstein.
Yeah,
I can't remember.
Norm is great.
I remember him saying something along the lines of, when he was coming up, the Times was the paper of record. Like, you could trust, for the most part, right? You could trust the information you got from the Times. Do you feel that in the post-cable news moment, and going back further, because I think the moment you're talking about, and it's something that I bring up in the kayfabe series that we're trying to finish, and it is on me to finish writing the script for episode 2. But there is this darkness that befalls a nation of trusting individuals of a certain age that happens during what you're talking about, which is Vietnam and Watergate. And does that malaise that the people are feeling, because there's no winning, using finger quotations, for Vietnam? And this is a moment where you have a lot of people, even in like quote unquote red cities, that don't like their kids coming back either in body bags, mutilated, or drug addicted. So there's a lot of anti-war sentiment in general, coupled with things like My Lai. Like, so much is coming out of this moment.
Yeah.
And to your point, there's
which we know about because of Cy Hirsch,
right? Because of journalists like Cy Hirsch. But we still don't say stuff like post-truth. I think we look at it more as conspiracy. Is there a difference between that time and this time?
There are obviously differences because we're here now and that was then. And so, and I'm not being glib about that. I mean, and if we want to attribute to Mark Twain that history might not repeat, but it rhymes, I would buy into that. But I think that it's an interesting juxtaposition, at least insofar as we've been writing about post-truth for some time. And we're, of course, opposed to the construct of post-truth, but here we are. Kellyanne Conway, one of the legal advisors in the first Trump term, actually was on news, talking at the news, the major networks, talking about the inauguration crowd size, right back when they were really worried about important things, and they were saying, well, we have alternative facts, right? So they had alternative facts, and anything that went against their alternative facts was fake news. So they're the ones that weaponized this. And it's the same kind of attack that we kind of saw, but it was more, I think it was the way in which that the Trump administration was attacking the press it was ham-fisted in a lot of ways. And it echoed Nixon. But it also was persistent to the degree to which they seemed impervious to any of the criticism. And like, facts didn't matter. And they just kept bulldozing through with their narratives. And rather than the so-called mainstream, which we call corporate media, establishment press, the legacy press included, rather than them double down and challenge the assertions and live in reality, they got sucked into the three-ring circus. There's Team Red, Team Blue, Carnival Barkers, and then the media, right? And then we had some of the loudest people from the peanut gallery on the internet, right? All kind of like shouting and hurling crazy ideas and insults that actually ended up driving the major narratives. The whole United States of Distraction book that Nolan Hayden and I wrote about was about that. It was about that this isn't about Trump. Trump is a symptom and a vehicle for this. And this is about the deconstruction of civil society through chaos. When people like Steve Bannon talk about flooding the zone, he's borrowing from Karl Rove 2 decades ago when he told Ron Suskind that, we're the reality industry. We make reality and you follow us and we tell you what it is. You don't objectively report on the facts. We tell you what the facts are, and you dutifully report them. If you want to try to check us out on that, we're already going to be 2 narratives and 3 stories down the road. You're never going to catch us. Well, Rove was prescient about that. Here we are, right? That is the strategy of flooding the zone and creating chaos. Never mind the Epstein files. We've had 3 or 4 major national and international crises in the last week.
Is that part of it? Because I've been saying, again, this is one of the things that made me wanted to do kayfabe in the first place. Listening to Trump and Bernie Sanders speak, it felt like I was watching the greatest wrestling match of all time. It's got everything you want in certain characters that you want to follow. They're old guys from the East Coast with these accents, and they say things in a certain way that you want to hear the next thing they have to say. They were so perfect as these adversaries for us to follow. And now you see kind of Trump alone. You use the term ringmaster. I don't know. And I just wrote something for Current Affairs about Trump and pro wrestling.
Yeah, totally.
I don't know what's real and what's fake with him, because he's just going to throw it up against a wall. Most of the stuff he says is kind of BS, but we're seeing in the last 2 years of Trump Part 2, he has filled his cabinet with people that are willing to do the things that the other people weren't willing to do. And it feels like, to your point about media being kind of these stenographers, that's all they know how to do, because at the end of the day, this is a business.
It's a job, right? And it's a job to write it down.
He's great for business again.
If they don't deliver the copy that delivers the clicks and the likes and the shares, they're out of a job. And that's part of the problem with the commercialism of the news industry. And we've written about it for years. People have been criticizing it for decades. And when I talk about that kind of criticism, I saw somebody earlier said something that the knowledge industry deserved to be bashed and deserved the attacks it has. And I would argue that that's partially true, but not all attacks are equal. Some are bad faith actors. Some are disingenuous. Some want to hijack the fact that we have problems and challenges, and rather than work systemically to improve them in the public interest, they're hijacking them for private concern to divide the public, particularly around culture war issues, particularly by pursuing emotionally hot button topics and just doubling down on those narratives, right? And you mentioned malaise from the 70s. Right, the stagflation and the malaise. And what we now have is almost more like adrenal burnout, right? I think it's a little different than malaise.
Does it feel like Blade one? Like, I've been reading, a good friend of mine, Michael Harris, wrote this book about living in collapse.
Yeah, exactly.
8 science fiction movies. Yeah. And he starts the book off and he says, Blade Runner is the past. It takes place in 2019. We're already past Blade Runner, and we're living in the Blade Runner universe. Does it feel like we're living in this world where it's like rich people are so disconnected? This is what the Epstein thing told me. Rich people are so disconnected that they live globally that they need a concierge like Epstein to just arrange meetings, show them where a freaking restaurant is, and also the sex stuff. But they live so globally, right? But the rest of us exist in the gray of the Blade Runner world, where we have to deal with the ecological collapse, and the overflow of crime. Like in that movie, kind of horrible things happen. I remember Harrison Ford shoots the clone lady in the back, and people are kind of like walking about like, it's what happens in Blade Runner world.
Well, that feels unfortunately a little all too on the nose with some of the kind of things that we have going on in our society right now. I mean, riffing on Philip K. Dick, do androids dream of electric sheep? Well, isn't that the AI surge where we are? The AI slop hallucinations, right? That are, basically they are generating even more of the post-truth climate that people swim in.
Yeah.
And because of things like confirmation bias and the echo chambers fashioned by algorithms, people are more and more and more just getting into these kinds of troughs, if you will, of inaccurate information, but things that either feel good to hate on the other side, or feel good just to allow me to unplug where I can and want to, and then plug into whatever I want to later. We now have billions of channels, right, of things to be plugging into through social media. So we do have a different media ecosystem, but we still have 5 or 6 companies controlling 90% of telecom. We still have 5 big tech firms controlling all of what's happening there. NVIDIA is still the center of that AI chip circus, right, and the AI bubble that's soon to burst. So there's a lot of effort that's gone into Bernays' theory of manufacturing consent from 100 years ago. DARPA is what birthed Palantir, right? That came out of total information awareness after 9/11 with Reagan era convicted felon Poindexter. This all came out of DARPA from post World War II. This is how Google got started. Facebook at first was, as you know, some kind of lame ass misogynistic thing to rate how hot people were on campus, which is like, yeah, that's the front of it. The back end of it is all surveillance. It's a surveillance machine. And besides it, it's the red pill, blue pill, meaning red team, blue team, right? It's the way in which narratives are suppressed and pushed. It's the way people are corralled and cajoled. And it is, in fact, the backbone of what is a virtual social credit system in this country, where people are hired and fired based on the whims of people in power over ephemeral political opinions, those spouting of which have very little historical concrete knowledge or verifiable facts behind them, right? That's what I see as part of, if you look at the new book this year, right? We're in the circus tent, right?
Yeah.
We're in there, and look who's at the back, right? Look at that, pretty nice. There's some pretty amazing dark things happening in the dark carnival, right? And outside the tent, right, we see people somehow clamoring to get in for some reason, right? And part of this is about deconstructing the tent. Part of this is about, again, what did Frank Zappa say? He made some quip at one point about, at some point, when the profits dry up and it's too hard to control what's happening, the military industrial complex people are just going to come. They're going to take down the screen. They're going to take down the stage. They're going to take down the lights. And we're all going to be left staring at the blank brick wall, right? And the show is over, and they're going to move out of town or move across the globe, or they're going to populate Mars, right? Well, guess what? We're not just staring at the blank wall. We're staring at the allegory in the cave. We're staring at Plato's cave. We're staring at the shadows that are cast there and the AI hallucinations that are being spread there, so that we now, in Orwellian sense, we can't even believe our own eyes. We are told by the party that we can't even trust our eyes and ears about what's happening, where the media has lost such a degree of any kind of authority that people will only rely on what Stephen Colbert called truthiness. They will only believe what they feel is right in their gut, and they can't be confused by facts. It's not an accident the United States doesn't teach media literacy. It's only taught in about 5 states. It's not an accident the United States doesn't have rival parties. It's not an accident the Supreme Court allowed unbridled money to come flying into the political system anonymously. This is all by design. And if you go back to people like Bernays, and then you couple it with other people who were arguing these things afterward, including Huxley and others, this has been the plan. This is the way in which you can have a psychic dictatorship without having people living at the point of a bayonet, right? I mean, although we're seeing more of that mask ripped off right now, and we're seeing armed forces, polluting the streets of the United States, committing acts of violence and atrocities and abduction and murder and so on, the likes of which people never dreamed of. Although I would then argue, oh no, people not only have dreamed it, it's happened in other societies, and people in our country, including Sinclair Lewis, who argued it can happen here in 1935 and 36, right? I think that we have missed so many opportunities to address how we got here, that so many folks who are unaware of that past are so overwhelmed by the so many things that are happening now that they have a difficult time deconstructing, that it is now making the ability of the public to show civil or civic courage in a way that actually manifests in some legitimate political change, where it actually affects some change in the real world. Activism has been taken online, right? All the things that we used to do in the public square have been privatized and are over at X, right? This has all been systematically robbed from the American public over the 20th century. So this is why we talk about the importance of the free press and independent press and the need for critical media literacy education so that people can really understand fact from fiction. They don't have to be told something or fact checked from an outside source. They can begin to really understand how these things are unfolding and recommit to building communities and local journalism. 25% of the country lives in a news desert, Jason. We need to rebuild that trust by rebuilding the news from the bottom up. We need to do it using our schools and education that the Trump administration is also trying to dismantle by design.
Can I ask you a question? There was a story that recently came out. Like we've seen these horrific events in Minneapolis, and to everyone that's watching in Minneapolis, our definitely our hearts go out to you guys, because you're fighting an insane battle with this domestic occupation where there's literally more ICE agents in your city than there are cops. That being said, a big reason why you have this surge there, right, is you have this young man that did this kind of insane, fallacious news story that, calling it a news story, I think, is giving it much more grace than it deserves. Someone told him that there was all this Somali fraud with these daycares that were receiving federal funds or state funds for these daycares. He went to these daycares, a lot of them, while they were closed. Now, this kid was interviewed by the Andrew Callahan kid that does the Channel 5 News thing.
You're talking about Nick Shirley.
Nick Shirley is the young man's name, yeah. And I don't know if he's a little off. I don't know his deal. But he's like, this building right here was just a fake building, and it never had a business. And so Andrew Callahan goes, well, it says the hours of operation are from 2 to 10, 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. And the guy goes, yeah. He goes, and you said you went there at 11 a.m. He goes, yes, I went there at 11 a.m. He goes, well, wouldn't it have been better to go there at 2? And he shrugged his shoulders and he goes, yeah, it would have been better, but it's not a real business.
There you go. You're in the feedback loop, Jason. You can't get out. It's the circular reasoning fallacy, right?
I saw that happen, and I thought about what we've been talking about, because a lot of what you say is, I don't disagree with anything you say about confirmation bias, but and when we say, and people don't care about the facts, but there comes a moment when you go, wait a minute, you went to go investigate fraud, and you literally didn't go when the places were open.
Yeah. And then lied about it and acted like it didn't matter. So you're committing fraud yourself.
The whole thing would never ride. No. Even, those people that be like, 7 on your side. This business has been selling frog balls instead of, instead of tapioca balls.
We went and took a look. Yeah. Team 7 was there. Yeah.
Those guys could never do a story and have it air if we got the story, we got the frog ball truth.
It's going to be on CBS very soon.
Like, what has happened to us as a people that we're begging for the 7 on your side guy to come back and be a breath of fresh air?
It's because people in this country do want to know what's happening. They do want to know what's going on in their communities. I believe many people do want what's best for themselves and their neighbors. A lot of the hate and divisiveness and so forth that we see is amplified by social media algorithms by design. We're fed these things on purpose because it gets a bigger rise. Many social scientific studies clearly indicate that people respond more to vitriol and hate and fear and these kind of things But I was just talking to Nolan Higdon, a media scholar and colleague of mine, about this very recently. He actually just wrote a column talking about the Nick Shirley thing and so on. Or we kind of get to this, right? And the antidote again to all of this is not more noise. It's slowing down. And our cult, it's again, our information culture is just like this ever accelerating juggernaut. It's like a tsunami. And nobody really thinks that they can stop for a minute, right? Like, and I would argue that if it's the people in the media, in the main, you mentioned earlier, the New York Times, the paper of record, right? All the news that fits the print, as I like to say. You know, these institutions are partially responsible for the ire and distrust that they're at the receiving end of, because they're not stepping up and calling it out. They're the ones that have the constitutional protections. They're the ones that have, the platforms and the amplification. Had they not sullied their reputations the degree to which they have, because of ownership and advertising and conflicts of interest and selling bogus WMDs, and we can go down the laundry list. Every book in the last 20 years that we've done for Project Censored has chronicled reasons why the mainstream, quote unquote, media doesn't really deserve a lot of respect. But Jason, that could be reversed. That could be changed. And it doesn't require people like Barry Weiss to go in and pretend she's cleaning house. It needs real journalists to run newsrooms in the public interest, according to the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics. Because when the American public do hear important factual news stories, they do respond. When they're seeing, even now with the partisan, hyper-partisan, and ideologically driven media landscape we have, we're still nearing half the public saying that they think the ICE actions are, they should stop, right? Yeah. So it takes time. And again, I'm back to that issue of like, we are living in such a hypersonic kind of hyper reality, to get into Baudrillard for a minute, right? Also apt, that no one thinks they have time enough to stop a minute to think about anything and ask questions and verify what's going on. I don't get to quote Ronald Reagan very often, but one of the things that always stuck with me is that he admitted on air that he had made a false statement, he claimed unintentionally, about what was happening with drugs and hostages in Iran, all that fiasco. But he also went on to later talk about the importance of trust but verify. And we have now, our institutions have eroded the degree to which that the trust is no longer there. And so what is there to verify other than my confirmation bias? We're back to that riff again, right? And I think that people want news and information. One of the things that I do at the Park Center for Independent Media at the college is we give out the Izzy Award every year, named after the legendary muckraking reporter I.F. Stone, Izzy Stone, who was a big reporter that actually bailed out of the whole establishment order and started the I.F. Stone Weekly, his own independent weekly that he wrote for nearly 20 years, right? Or about 20 years. And if you go back and look at the reporting he was doing, it's the kind of reporting that is in the vein of Upton Sinclair and Lincoln Steffens and Ida Tarbell. It was based on what was going on with people like George Seldes. It influenced an entire generation of muckraking journalists and activists like Ralph Nader, and including people like Carl Bernstein and Carl Woodward and Bernstein, right? These are important things that are part of our history that we need to bring back into the public consciousness. We need to bring back. So each year we give these awards to what we think are some of the most important independent reports that the corporate media don't find, which is very similar to what we do at Project Censored. And I'll tell you, go to parkindymedia.org or to projectcensored.org and take a look at those stories that the independent press are covering. Seriously, they are absolutely extraordinary and important stories that I think that if these major platforms and these major newspapers could put aside the conflicts of interest and the advertisers and the interests of the owners, because they operated in the public interest, the public wants to know how they're being fleeced. The public wants to know why the wealthy have this concierge for the world. They want to know how they're being lied to ritually. And I think that we need to show more examples of how that reporting is actually going on. And so that's why when we talk about, quote, the media, I do like to differentiate. And that's not to suggest that the corporate media never report anything accurately or well. They do. It's just that they also equally participate in propaganda, Team Red, Team Blue antics, and catering to their advertisers. And as A.J. Liebling wrote in 1960, the best way to get to ensure freedom of the press is to own one. And now we have a totally billionaire-owned press.
We're seeing that even with small. When I was coming home today, I get the San Diego radio here in Baja, and there is a bid to buy up these small TV stations and radio stations that's for Sinclair, and there's definitely a pushback. They don't want to get bought out and have to kind of reiterate the same narrative over and over, because what we end up getting is like everything you're seeing on the streets is far left insurgencies in Minneapolis, and Venezuela was led by a power hungry dictator, so everything that happened there is fine and dandy. My fear that I have in living in Blade Runner reality is that Donald Trump is the ringmaster of a certain kind of horrortainment that could only really work in this moment where we love true crime and internet journalists with their true crime affection control a lot of our media diet when it comes to what we think is quote unquote news. And I don't know if you saw recently, there was a gentleman whose wife was missing. Did you see this in Chicago? This kind of fits in with the junk food. I think it's very close to junk foodie. There's a gentleman in Chicago whose wife was missing, and he's a black guy. His wife was a white lady. I don't think that matters, but some people did. And he did what most husbands would do if your wife hasn't come home. He left an impassioned message on the news. Please, if you're out there, come home, family. All the comments were, man, just tell us where she is. 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 Turns out the lady drove off of a cliff, and it looks like she killed herself.
Yeah.
And the gentleman wasn't lying. He really didn't know where his wife was. But all these journalists online were actually apologizing, which is something I've never seen, about literally trying to ruin this man's life, which has also become kind of a part of journalism, which be really
gotcha journalism.
Yeah, that Nancy Grace kind of stuff. That scares me because Trump becomes this thing that we make popcorn to watch the next horror unfold, and then becomes normalized. Yeah, someone saying Jerry in the comments. What happens when actually our daily life is a Jerry Springer episode and we just can't shake ourselves out of it?
Well, Jason, I don't have any chairs to throw at you right now, but if I did, I'd throw it at you, and then I'd sue Jerry for hurting my back in the process. So, but yeah, we digress. That's disinfotainment. Disinfotainment's worse than just the mindless entertainment of Jerry in some ways. But, again, and no disrespect to the late night court jesters from John Oliver to Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert and whomever. But it's been distilled to that. Like, it's really hard to watch that and laugh about it because, frankly, the things they're talking about aren't funny at all. I guess we're reduced to laughter as therapy, and they're allowed to say things journalists aren't because it's, quote, funny. And it's compartmentalized and controlled because even the president of the United States wants to go so far as not just to, have his friends buy out CBS and TikTok and everything else. He wants these companies to fire entertainers because he doesn't like the jokes they crack. I mean, this is getting absurd in a medieval way in that capacity. But, back to this issue of the disinfotainment, that's part of the consequence of a junk food news cycle that just never goes away, right? We are addicted to these stories. We do let our guilty pleasures run our lives, the degree to which that we can't look away. For some reason, sure, my wife liked Taylor Swift, and when my kid was watching football. So I guess I would know the Kelsey guy and
Yeah.
Taylor Swift. But like, do I need to know intimate details of like all these
Yeah.
things happening in their lives and that her future mother-in-law is on the Traitors and all? Like, why do I know this stuff? Like,
Who's
why
using
do I?
Ozempic and who isn't? Yeah.
Alan's cool though, but like, why do I know this stuff, man? Like, and talk about traitors. Let's just get the whole freaking cabinet on there. Let's get the leadership of the DNC and do a real traitors show. Let's get the people at the FCC, like Brendan Carr, on that show. Like, those are the real traitors of democracy. Those are the real traitors. Let's see that kind of a real inverse Roman holiday, if you were, where the public can actually watch those people that have screwed us and fleeced us raw, that they might actually see the light of justice, and we can hit a reboot and actually have a self-governing culture and society in the 21st century.
How is AI? You work with the youth. How's I have professor
I'm not among them, that's for sure.
I have professor friends that complain about a couple things. AI is definitely one of them.
It's absurd. It's totally absurd.
There's certain
half the campuses want to just adopt it for everything. And sometimes the very people that you think would be on the front lines of fighting against it for independent thought, writing skills, critical thinking, the whole 9 yards, are coming from places like English. It's like totally bizarre that these people jump faculty to administrative positions and get better pay, and then they become champions of AI because there's all these big dollar signs hanging off of it, right? And look, AI can't even detect itself, right? And so they sell computer tools to detect the plagiarism and the problems that the computer tools created. Where have we seen this problem before, Jason? Let's go. Should we go back to the Industrial Revolution? How far back do we want to go on that? And then we have pedagogical Taylorism, where they then try to measure every single thing every teacher does in every classroom. And now some colleges want to like comb your syllabus, and they'll just soon have them teaching the classes for you. That's where it's heading.
Does that scare you, or are you just preparing for it in a different
way? Absolutely. I'm not saying that AI doesn't have some uses in our society. What I'm saying is, as far as higher education goes, it's an end around to the core elements of higher order thinking. In other words, I don't have to do the thinking. It did it for me. Why should I spend 2 hours reading the book and synthesizing it? I typed in the prompt and it spit it out. Well, look, I just told you why. It hallucinates half the time, right? Although 2/3 of people in the United States regularly use some kind of AI because it's being rammed down their throats, not just in school, but across platforms and applications on their phones. 90% of Americans carry around in their pockets. But when it comes to higher education, it's more insidious because it's wrapped up as a solution to a problem it's created. Whereas, I have to go back now to things like blue books, or I have to go back to oral tradition of like talking to people about things and having actual talking. Like, it's difficult to assign things like research papers because, look, I can tell you this, I've caught people doing it, but I can't prove it very well. It's very, very, very difficult to definitively prove it in a way that doesn't open educational institutions up for lawsuits, which is why a number of colleges stopped using Turnitin, one of the programs embedded in Canvas, which is a data harvesting machine that actually shares all kinds of student data with companies, and AI is now scraping that too, right? We hope to see more lawsuits coming, I'm sure. But the real thing that's going on with this is that given that Turnitin has false positives, even if they were only 1%, Vanderbilt University, for example, did a study and they showed that even with 1% false positives, that because of their student body and the amount of written work that went through in an academic year, they would have literally hundreds of students falsely accused of plagiarism on their permanent records. And as a result, they didn't think it was really a good idea. And look, that's staggering. That's like a pretty high percentage of like maybe getting it right. But the so small percentage, and now we know with things like AI, it's just ritually wrong. It's ritually inaccurate and sloppy. And look, technologists warned us of this 8 years ago. Aviva Vaidya talked about the infocalypse and how we were on the verge of being able to manufacture our own realities, the degree to which we'd never done or seen before. And Sora 2 is now here. And it's in the consumer public. It's in our hands, right? We have now seen prominent political figures showing up in media, and that they of things that they never did, that they never said, but it looks so convincing. It's complete. That's where we are. That's why before we started, I was talking about the jump the shark business from Happy Days. We're way past that. I mean,
that's the way it feels. Especially as we're seeing these things ramp up, and it felt like 2020, when everyone was out in the streets because of George Floyd, everywhere, right? There was, we are George Floyd, and even places like Palestine, France, right? Everybody was talking about it. And here we have this situation where a few people have gotten, 30 some people have gotten killed in ICE custody, and 2 people recently got killed. 1 person by an off-duty ICE agent that no one is really talking about, and another woman, for the most part, got killed on camera in Minneapolis, a place where since 2019 people are dying on camera, right? Philando Castile, George Floyd, this one. Yeah. Another young man, actually, during the George Floyd thing, there was another young man that got shot in the area. Does it feel to you like in the post 2020 moment, when we had this explosion of influencer culture, that there's a lot less people outraged in the streets because we have all these different avenues for our outrage? I'll write an angry post about it. I'll write a poem about it. I'll sing a song about it, put on Spotify.
Yeah. And Spotify, which will then go and fund more war crimes and surveillance and kill the artistic industry. Right. The hypocrisy continues. The illusions will continue uninterrupted. Right. These outlets or these platforms that claim to do something that they actually are not doing, and they're in fact doing the opposite. Right. But yeah, a lot of what was happening has been taken offline. A lot of COVID and people not being out and about, has had lasting impact. A lot of the students I have in college now, don't get me wrong, there's amazing, brilliant young people. And that's the reason I really am charged up and love doing what I'm doing, and I'm privileged to do it, is that they are there. So I'm not generalizing that like all these students are cheating and using AI, right? Yes, it's a problem. Yes, some people are doing it. But I also have amazing interactions with young people that are very concerned. They're very interested in what's going on, and they want to change the world, and they want to make a difference. And I know that they're already doing it. I'm seeing it happen, right, with some of the young people that I get the privilege to work with. But the thing that we as educators try to tell them is that, well, there's more of us too. There's more people of our generation, Gen X and others, that we want what you want. But we're also neck deep further into the history of the problems in some ways. And sometimes it takes new and different thinking to transcend the trajectory of the culture that created the problems that you and I are now discussing, right? In other words, perhaps it's not only a bad thing that some younger people don't know all the history of some of the things we're talking about, because it might free their mind up to creatively think of something that we're not. And that's what really solutions journalism can do. That's what the kind of advocacy journalism that looks to find the facts on the ground and then let them tell a story that may contradict all the other corporate outlets or other things. That's a powerful force in society that can build the trust in the public that has been lost. And that's why you're seeing a rise among the individual influencers and so on, is because a lot of people, and look, I see some of these people popping off completely nonsensically, and then I see some of them that are spot on, right? But you know what? That's exactly what it's like when you look at the establishment press. The New York Times can publish an amazing story on one page and publish absolute drivel on the next side. This is why it goes back to critical thinking. This is why it goes back to understanding the importance of civic engagement and living in a civil society and what it means. This is why it's important to understand the Bill of Rights. This is why it's important to understand that democracy is a verb. It's not a spectator sport. This is, again, why I think education is the place to kickstart. And that's why the administration has attacked the knowledge industry. They went after the press. They went after professors. They're going after artists, and they're going after students. That's by design. It's by design because that's where the cultural criticism comes from. That's where movements are born, and that's how change occurs over generations.
Well, his name is Mickey Huff. The latest book from Project Censored is out now, wherever you are watching or listening in the show. Sorry, there's a link in the description where you can find it. Before I even talk about what we're going to talk about, there's a link directly to Project Censored, where you can get the book directly from the source, not from Amazon. Mickey,
yes.
What are you working on next, brother?
Well, I'll tell you, the book State of the Free Press 2026 is out. You can get it at projectcensored.org. It's out from the Censored Press. We're totally independent these days, even though we had a long partnership with 7 Stories Press out of New York for a very long time. So check that out online. We have a lot of free educational materials online. We have a lot of different curriculum. We've got our validated independent news stuff. We've got a bunch of the previous chapters from all our books online for free. Please check it out. Check us out on social media because we go where the people are. Even though we criticize social media, we're right there on TikTok and Instagram. Go see the kind of stuff we're doing there, man. It's the kind of metal, punk rock, DIY. Get in there and throw the wrench in the gears of the machine, man. Mario Savio style, right? Get in there and put a stop to it where it's taking place and push back. So projectcensored.org is the website. Lots of free stuff there. ParkIndieMedia.org is the Park Center for Independent Media. A lot of other things there and all the great Izzy winners. I also curate the ifstone.org site. Again, we've got a lot of stuff for free, and we do a lot of workshops and trainings. So if anybody out there wants to hear from us or wants us to talk to them or get books to teachers in your schools, one of the great books we have is The Media and Me. It's one of the only media literacy books for young people that's being adopted in schools across the country. This is where you got to start, Jason. We got to start here. We got to start in our communities with young people, and we really got to center critical thinking and civic engagement and media literacy. And for 50 years, that's what we've been doing at Project Censored. I'm sad we have to do it, but we're totally independent, and I appreciate all the support that any of your folks out there can get, including, like I said, people that just want the literature, people that want information. I'm happy to send things to people for free if they really want it, and happy to carry on a dialogue. So I can't thank you enough, Jason. Not only for having me on again, very gracious of you, but just for your important work and insight and the many dots that you connect across topics on your program and your work. I think it's really important. So I just appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Mickey. You know, I just come here to make dick jokes.
Yeah. I left a few of those out.
Well, look,
I censored them.
Mickey and I are going into the champagne room. If you are a patron or a paid YouTube subscriber, the link is already up. It's a special one because we're going to be playing some of the best hard rock and metal songs from 40 years ago, 1986. What is the best album to come out that year? Master of Puppets comes out that year. Rain and Blood comes out that year. Somewhere in Time by Iron Maiden. My favorite Maiden record comes out.
Man. Year. Rage for Order.
Oh, you're going deep. Okay, look, there's going to be some other people joining Mickey and I. I'm not going to say who. But
Hallows Eve, a little death and insanity is what we got going on right now.
It's good. It's going to be a fun one. So join us for that. And we are where to go? Out.